Good morning, everyone. This is Kat Sims. I'm the Executive Director at the Master Builders Association of King and Snohomish Counties, and we're happy to have all of the members from MBACS joining today. Good morning to all of you, and good afternoon, and a special welcome to all of the NAHB presenters who have joined us today. I appreciate you guys all making the time to be here with us today. So a few comments just to kind of set the tone of where we are right now. First, I think all of you know that our primary focus as your association has been and continues to be getting all of you back to work safely as soon as possible. We are working closely with the folks at BIAW on this effort, and I believe that significant progress in that regard is being made. We're not there yet, but I think we're on the right path. So to update you on where that stands, a proposal has been made to the governor to get you back to work. This proposal has the support of BIAW, the Association of General Contractors, AWB, the Washington State Building and Construction Trades Council, and the engineers local. So and the carpenters, I should add. So I think that we're on a path there. We're not there yet, but we're on that path. And I fully expect that additional safety protocols specific to COVID are going to be required for anyone returning to work. And we are working right now, as is BIAW, on developing some tools and templates and checklists for all of you. So hopefully in the next few days, we'll have those ready to roll out to you, and you're going to probably need site-specific plans for each of your sites. So we'll try to give you some materials to make that possible for you. In the meantime, if you have not been to the MBACS COVID landing page, I recommend you check that out. It has a wealth of resources to help you. MBACS staff is currently monitoring how cities and counties and utilities are responding to the outbreak in King and Snohomish counties. And this includes updates on how they're modifying or canceling public or in-person meetings, adopting work from home policies for their employees. And this landing page is updated daily, so please take a look at that if you haven't seen it. We also post regular updates on matters of significance related to COVID on that page. That page, in case you haven't seen it, is www.mbacscovid19.org, mbacscovid19.org. And there are also lots of resources under the link to industry resources, including those that have been developed by NAHB and BIAW. So really a wealth of resources there, and I recommend you check that out. So of course, when you joined the MBA, you became a member of the National Association of Home Builders, NAHB, and a member of BIAW, the Washington Association. And today we have a few folks from the NAHB team who are here to tell us about the view from the other Washington, D.C. So I know that many of you have questions about programs available under the CARES Act and also wonder what additional phase of federal aid might be forthcoming. So we invited the folks from NAHB and they graciously agreed to join us today. Jerry Howard sent his regrets this morning. He's been pulled away at the very last minute for another meeting that he's doing with the President's Great American Economic Revival Advisory Group. But instead we have Brett Diggs, who is NAHB's Chief of Staff. And so I'm going to next turn it over to Brett. Thanks for joining us, Brett.
Absolutely, Kat. Thank you for arranging this. I just want to welcome all of our friends on the West Coast. I know it's late morning there, so good morning to all of you. We, when Kat contacted us last week and started asking us questions about some of the federal aid and some of the types of questions that you all were asking her, as we talked through it and talked through some of the other webinars we had been doing for the NHB leadership and some other groups within the Federation, she quickly asked us if we'd be willing to do one for the folks at MBA, and we agreed. So, Kat, thanks for for pulling us in. We're happy to provide it. These are the resources that you all, as members, certainly are entitled to, and want to make sure that you get all the answers that you can. So I'm going to just kind of lay out what we're going to go through today. We will be posting in the chat box links to specific resources. We have a ton of resources available on the NAHB website as well. I see that Michael Walsh has posted some resources from MBA. We'll be doing the same thing. There's a ton of resources on our website. We will also provide the slide decks that we're going to go through today to Kat and her team to post on the MBA website, as well as a complete recording of this webinar, so you can forward it to other members of the association, and we'll make this available to you so everybody has access. But again, I want to thank Kat and also Gina and Liz on her team for working with the NAHB staff to turn this around in about 3 days' time. So thanks to all for scrambling to put the pieces in place. What we're going to do today, we're combining multiple topics and webinars that we've been doing over the last 3 weeks for the Federation. NAHB, as you all would imagine, our offices are closed. They've been closed, I think this is the 5th week we've been working from home. While the offices are not physically accessible to us, we have been working, and the team that you'll hear from today has been working extraordinarily hard and has done a lot of great work to get the resources pulled together and make sure that anything that we can get in your hands, we're doing that. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start with kind of an overall economic update from our chief economist, Robert Dietz. From there, we'll have Jim Tobin, who is NAHB's chief lobbyist, talk about sort of the view from 10,000 feet as to what's happening with the administration and Congress with future stimulus packages that are being discussed. And then we'll get real specific with our teams and talk about the EIDL program, the Paycheck Protection Program, and then paid leave and unemployment issues and insurance issues from that standpoint. We're not going to get specifically deep into the tax issues today. We do have those resources available to us. We've got J.P. Delmore and David Logan on our team available on the call, and they can answer your questions in the chat box, or they can follow up and get you the answers if you have questions as it relates to tax. I would emphasize before I turn it over to our teams that we're not here to provide you specific business advice on your business, certainly not from a tax or legal standpoint. So there may be times when we defer and say that you should talk to your accountant or your tax specialists at home, because we won't be doing that, but we will give you as many answers as we can. We also, with us today, have Janice Penman, who is with our outside legal counsel of Baker Hostetler, who works with NHB on a whole host of issues. So we have a ton of resources. I'll introduce some of the other folks as we get through the first part. Jill mentioned earlier, please keep your phones, your microphones on mute, so we can keep the audio clear. If we start having problems, she'll mute everybody, and we'll sort of back up from there and start over. But please try to be aware of that and keep your phones silenced so we can hear everybody and get through it all. I think with that, I will turn it over to Rob. Anytime you have questions, please put them in the chat box. But if I would ask that you kind of wait until we get through the presentations, because hopefully most of your questions will be answered, and then at the very end we will go through all of the questions that you type and answer them. So with that, NHB's chief economist, Rob Dietz. Rob, take over, please.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Brett, and thank you, Kat. I know I joined many of you in January to really show how different the outlook and the forecast is from that time to where we are now. I don't believe that session that we held in January, we used the word virus once. So clearly things have changed a great deal. I'm going to walk you through our current national outlook. I'm just going to start off with some themes. It's clearly, we're in a period of great uncertainty. It's difficult to model how a virus is going to play out and how government agencies are going to react to that. So much of the economic and the housing forecast right now is really dependent on government actions, state actions, federal actions, local government policies. That really kind of highlights the importance of membership of the three-legged stool of the association. We know, a bit of good news. If you look at some of the virus data recently, it does look like the country has turned a corner. The growth rates are slowing. The actual daily counts seem to be going down. We've got good news in your area, in Washington, in New York City. So I think, we've got a few more weeks of this, but some certainty is coming. Unfortunately, we're probably going to have to wait for a vaccine in terms of really kind of getting back to 100% of normal conditions. The way we've been thinking about it in terms of a forecasting perspective is try to think of things in terms of the next 2 months, the next 2 quarters, and the next 2 years. The next 2 months are going to be very tough. The economic data is going to be very bad. Over the next 2 quarters, we expect to see some stabilization, growing certainty, growing control of the virus, and then it's probably going to take about 2 years for the economic data to really get back to normal conditions. Clearly, the stock market has reacted. Big declines, some recent stabilization. We're watching the supply chain, both in construction and other sectors of the economy, to try to model how GDP growth is occurring. Oops, somebody took control of my slides there. We're also looking at the consumer. Declining consumer confidence is going to be really key for looking at auto purchases and other effects in terms of how the consumer holds up. So here's our current, I'm going to scroll down, here's our current GDP forecast. As you can see, the second quarter of 2020 is particularly negative. Our current forecast model suggests a negative 21% growth rate in the second quarter. That's that large blue decline there in 2020. There are other forecasts that are much more negative. JP Morgan's got it down negative 40%. This is a recession of choice, public health policy necessity, but that's the reason for the severe decline. We think GDP is going to be down in 2020 about 5% for the year. And then we've got a rebound building in the fourth quarter with some really aggressive gains in 2021 as essentially the rebound takes hold. With that kind of change in GDP growth, you're going to get some pretty dramatic labor market changes. We've seen almost 17 million job losses over the last few weeks, and the result is that by the time we get the April and May unemployment data, we're probably going to see an unemployment rate at least 14%. Our forecast model is pointing at 14 right now. There are forecasts out there suggesting unemployment rates of as high as 20%. We do think that as the rebound takes hold at the end of 2020, we will see fairly rapid declines compared to other kinds of recessions. For example, if you look at the red line here, which is the unemployment rate, it took quite a while for that unemployment rate to come down. That's not what we're forecasting here. That's not to say there won't be economic damage, and particularly in the small business sector as we move forward, but we think that many of these people can come back to work fairly quickly. In the meantime, one of the things that we've been doing at NAHB with the communications department here is doing weekly online polling of builder challenges. I'm putting up here data from the first week of April. We just collected the next weeks of data that will go up on our economics blog, Eye on Housing, fairly soon. But these are the top challenges that were identified in the survey. The top challenge, obviously, is buyer traffic dropping way off with social distancing and stay-at-home orders. 96% of builders citing that as a factor. There's another number of other impacts that are listed. I would point you to the last two on this list. The second to last is supply of building products and materials. 72% of builders actually citing that as an issue. I think, unfortunately, that will probably grow. If you think back to the 2-month, 2-quarter, and 2-year perspective that I gave you at the start, that is probably a 2-month to 2-year type challenge because, one, we receive a lot of building material products that are imported into the United States. Global supply chains are obviously highly disrupted. And then we've got manufacturing shutdowns. And so in our surveys, we're hearing about shortages and access issues to things like lighting fixtures, plumbing fixtures, even kitchen cabinets. The last item on this list is also worth noting. 51% of builders said they were having difficulty obtaining new loans. These would be A, D, and C type loans. I just recently looked at the most recent weekly data that we have not published yet but that 51% share appears to be going up. So that's going to be another issue we're going to have to follow in terms of community banks, regional banks, and their willingness to make loans, particularly since it's not just the virus that's affecting the economy right now, but we have those dramatic declines in oil prices. That means there's a lot of energy development loans that will likely fail, and that will have an impact on those regional and community banks. So this morning we published our April measure of builder confidence. This is the NAHB Wells Fargo Housing Market Index. It was posted a dramatic decline. We fell from a level of 72 in March down to a level of 30 in April. It was the lowest level of builder confidence since 2012. It was the first time that builder confidence had been below the break-even level of 50 since 2014. It was the largest single monthly decline we've had in the history of the index going back to 1985. It fell 42 points. So I think this is a fairly good representation, not just of where builder sentiment lies across the country, which is, that the March and the April data was particularly bad with job losses, rise in unemployment. But it's also an indication of where we think single-family construction activity is going to take itself. You can see the HMI line here is in blue. Single-family starts is in red, and it's a pretty tight correlation. So you can kind of eyeball it and do your own kind of forecast. But the next slide has our more formal forecast that comes out of our modeling. You can see the blue line after the red vertical line is the forecast period for 2020. A pretty dramatic drop mid-year for single-family construction, followed by a rebound that begins to take hold in the fourth quarter, and then a grudgingly sort of stubborn return to trend going into 2021 and 2022. The net result of that would be to lower 2020 single-family starts by almost 20%, and then a rebound in 2021, and maybe a little bit above trend to make up for lost single-family construction that would take place in 2020. And with that, that's our high-level overview of where we are in the economy. I'm happy to take questions by email. My email address is there. And as Brett mentioned in the beginning, we'll make sure that that slide deck will be available to you through CAT and the association. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rob. Before I turn over to Jim Tobin, who's our chief lobbyist, I just want to make one point. CAT mentioned that our CEO, Jerry Howard, had been appointed to the White House Economic Revival Advisory Group to start talking about what comes next with getting the economy going and what the impacts have been. Jerry's on that call right now. If he is able to, if we're still going when that call ends, Jerry will join us and he can give us a quick update of that later on the call as well. So if you have questions for Rob Dietz, please go ahead and type those in the chat box if you'd like to have them addressed on this call. You can certainly email him, as he said, but if you want to put them in the chat box, we'll go through all the presentations and then we can start with questions for Rob at the very end. So with that, I'd like to introduce our chief lobbyist, Jim Tobin. Jim?
Thanks, Brett, and good morning to all our friends out on the West Coast. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk briefly about the advocacy efforts, and it's a combination of four departments at NAHB: the legal team led by Jim Rizzo, the regulatory team led by Dave Ledford, our public affairs team and communications team led by Paul Lopez, and I bring up the rear with the government affairs team, and we've all been working seamlessly together on a variety of efforts, which probably at the beginning of the crisis were largely focused on making sure that we could keep as many of our builders and the industry moving and building during many of the shutdowns. And I know certainly Washington State was the tip of the spear, both from the infection rate early on, but also taking the most draconian measures to shut down their entire economy. And I know how much you all have been affected, and I'm glad to hear at the top of the call what Kat had said, that there may be some light at the end of the tunnel now, and hopefully the efforts of your staff members back there, as well as your volunteer members, have been able to break through with Governor Inslee and at least show that we can continue to build, we can continue to satisfy customers and keep the industry moving in the short term, even if it's at a reduced pace. So I'm glad to hear that there may be some movement on that. But that was our main focus in trying to make sure that we can indeed build. So that was our effort here in Washington, D.C. with our legal team, as well as our regulatory and government affairs team, using our contacts on Capitol Hill and inside the administration to get the Department of Homeland Security to deem construction as an essential industry in this time. That took a lot of effort to get the government to do that. And I think it's been beneficial, at least showing governors across the country that they are that we can and should be building in this time. The second piece came from the CARES Act, which is the large piece of legislation Congress passed just about 2.5 weeks ago now, and our effort making sure that legislation was going to be available to the broadest swath of our members, and that includes access to small business administration programs that my colleague Alex Strong will delve and Heather Vorman will delve into in a couple more minutes, but also the tax provisions in that bill, making sure that we could keep more capital in your pockets as you struggle through the downturn. But more importantly, probably than most members across the country, to you, as since the governor shut your ability to do any kind of construction out there, shut that down. It was really important to make sure that we had the right provisions in place to keep your businesses liquid. The other piece, then that once we passed that legislation, we transitioned into not only communicating to you through Paul Lopez's team and our regulatory team on what is available to you all, but more importantly, making sure that some of the holes that we found, that we were able to plug those holes pretty quickly. And Alex and Heather will walk through some of the frustrations that we've had with this program. And yes, we know that there are some builders out there who are not being allowed to apply for the small business, the payroll protection program in particular, as well as the ability of our state and local associations that are organized as 501c6s to access those valuable funds in those PPP programs. We continue to advocate on Capitol Hill for those two issues, but more importantly, in the short term, inside the White House. And we are keenly aware of trying to fix the issues with our members and the spec builder issue that seems to be hit or miss depending on what banks interpret the rules differently. So we continue to advocate inside the Treasury Department. We were on the phone. Jerry Howard in particular was on the phone with the White House 3 times yesterday, as well as a direct line into Secretary Mnuchin, getting him to create these new rules over the course of as they roll out these new rules. So we continue to advocate to make sure that the programs in the CARE Act are usable to the widest swath of our members as possible. And then lastly, what comes next, and that's what we're crafting now, is Dave Ledford and his team continue to look at the banking system, whether it's HUD or FHFA and Fannie and Freddie, to make sure that our multifamily and single-family builders and their customers are able to weather the storm and the rules that the banks are putting in place to make sure that no one, that people skip rental payments or even mortgages, to make sure that the banking system and the finance mechanisms for our buildings remain in solid footing. And then finally, once we get past this what I would call, it's not even a stimulus phase, it's more of a stabilization phase, finding new ways to make sure that these programs that are already enacted continue to serve us, but then also looking towards that recovery phase. What are we going to need as an industry in future pieces of legislation? And that's what Jerry Howard, as Brett said, engaging with the White House on President Trump's team on the recovery, making sure that this industry is well represented at that table and knowing what we need to do to come out of this as quickly as possible, and then accelerate back to the capacity that we're building to before the pandemic hit. So that's my brief overview on where we were and where we're going, and I'll turn it back to you. And again, feel free to ask any questions and email me at jtobin@nahb.org. Happy to answer any questions you have. But Brett, back to you.
Thanks, Jim. If you have any questions for Jim, you can type those in the chat box as well. And again, if you have questions for Rob Dietz, put those in there also, and we'll revisit those when we get to the end. We want to turn now to more specifics on the CARES Act. And as Jim mentioned, we're going to get really into sort of the nuts and bolts of it. So We're going to talk about the EIDL program. Alex Strong, who's one of our federal legislative directors, is going to address that, and then Heather Borman, who works in our housing finance area, is going to cover the Paycheck Protection Program. And then finally, Alexis Mock, who's also on the federal legislative side, is going to talk about paid leave and unemployment insurance, easy for me to say, and then we'll take all of your questions at the end. So with that, I see Alex has got his video up and he's got his mute off. He's ready to roll. So Alex, take it away.
Thanks, Brett. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, perfect. I appreciate this, and I appreciate this opportunity. Good morning. As Brett mentioned, my name is Alex Strong. I'm the Federal Legislative Director at NAHB, who covers, among other things, small business issues. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about one of the two programs we really fought hard for in the CARES Act. And before I get into it, I just wanted to sort of piggyback off what Jim said, in that we know certainly that that the builders are able to avail themselves of these programs, and they're starting to actually receive funds from these loans. We know from the SBA actually just yesterday that they're putting out figures showing what industry is being funded and to what level. And as it stands currently, construction is at the top of that list. Now that includes commercial construction as well, but we know that fortunately a lot of funds are getting out into the construction industry. We also know, as Jim mentioned, that some folks are not able, or having trouble accessing these programs, and we want to fight to change that in the next Corona package that Jim alluded to. So, but without further ado, I'm going to get into the EIDL loan program. That is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. This is one of two programs created and expanded in the CARES Act. What is the EIDL program? It is direct assistance from the Small Business Administration in the form of low-interest loans to small businesses or private nonprofits who have been affected negatively by a declared disaster. So who is eligible is the next logical question for this program. Well, it's those that are in a declared disaster area. So first and foremost, every state in the union and every territory is a federally declared disaster area for these purposes. So everyone satisfies that hurdle. Beyond that, there are additional criteria to be a small business, and they defined in the CARES Act, they define this to be having not more than 500 employees, which is much larger than the standard definition that they use, that the SBA uses for our industry. You can also be a sole proprietor with or without employees. Independent contractors are eligible for this program. Cooperatives, tribal small businesses, and importantly, 501c6s, most of our HBAs, are eligible to participate in the EIDL loan program, provided they aren't, quote, in the business of lobbying. And this is where I typically turn it over to our outside counsel, Janice Penman, who can give us some insight into what SBA means and what the CARES Act meant when it said that folks who are in the business of lobbying could not access these funds. So Janice, are you here with us? Okay, not hearing from Janice. Hopefully she'll jump in here in a second. She may be on mute, but basically what Janice has said and what our outside counsel determined in looking at this is that if more than 50% of your resources are devoted to lobbying, then you would be ineligible for this program. So that's something important to note, an important consideration, though this should not, as Brett said at the outset, this should not substitute for professional direction or legal advice. You need to consult with your attorney and with your tax counsel if you're a 501c6, if you're an HBA and you're going to apply for this program. You need to make sure that you're under that threshold. I'll blow through these. The EIDL terms and conditions, they are all on the SBA website, and I would strongly urge you to go check out the exhaustive list if you're going to apply for this program. But just some of the high-level points. The maximum loan amount is $2 million, depending on demonstrated injury. The interest rate was supposed to be, in legislation, was capped at 4%, but we know that small businesses are getting about 3.75%, and 501c6s are getting 2.75% on this loan. Maturities, you can get this for up to 30 years, with the first payment not being due for a year. And this is something I want to emphasize, and the eligibility for forgiveness. This loan, the EIDL loan, is not eligible to be forgiven. That's in stark contrast to what you're going to hear from my colleague Heather Vorman on the PPP program. So you will have a loan if you apply for this and receive it that will not be forgiven by the federal government. Again, visit sba.gov disaster for all the terms and conditions. The allowable uses for the EIDL loan, this is a loan that's intended to be for working capital. It covers payroll and other costs, obligations that cannot be met due to revenue loss or for other uses. It's a pretty broad swath, but again, consult the SBA website as you go to apply. And for a full exhaustive list of the allowable uses. This is really my final point, and this was a new component to the EIDL program that was created in the CARES Act and is particularly appealing for some HBAs. The CARES Act created an EIDL emergency grant, and that is when you go online, when you go to sba.gov to apply for this loan, you can request an advance of up to $10,000 to be provided within 3 days. What we're hearing in practice is that they take 2 to 3 weeks to process the application, and then 3 days from that, you will receive the emergency. You might receive the emergency grant if it's awarded. The allowable uses for the emergency grant are on the screen there. I'll go through those just really quickly: providing paid sick leave, maintaining payroll, making rent or mortgage payments, repaying obligations cannot be met due to revenue loss again. And this, finally, on the new emergency grant component, there is no repayment requirement. Let me repeat that. If you apply for an EIDL loan, request the up to $10,000 grant, if you get that $10,000 grant and are subsequently denied the EIDL loan, you do not have to repay the EIDL emergency grant. So that's something to consider when looking at this program as well. I'm sure we'll have some questions on that later. Finally, again, this is in contrast to the PPP program you're about to hear about. You apply for this, whereas the PPP, you go to your neighborhood SBA approved lender. In the case of the EIDL loan, you go online to the SBA disaster loan website, and I've got that address on the screen, but you can also get that through NAHB's coronavirus portal as well. So with that, I'll kick it back to you, Brett, or I can kick it to Heather. Either way, I'll be around for questions if anyone has them.
Thanks, Alex. Heather, why don't you go ahead and jump in?
Sure. So like Alex said, I'm going to be talking about the Paycheck Protection Program, or it's also known as the PPP. And this was part of the CARES Act. They allocated $349 billion to this program to basically help folks stay on the payroll and help businesses stay afloat. As was Jim spoke about earlier, there have been some issues after the interim rule was released by Treasury on this program a couple of weeks ago. There are some barriers for builders getting involved in this program, primarily for folks that build homes for future sale. Now, we're not sure all the parameters around that. Does it mean that you build one spec home a year? Does it mean that half your business is spec homes? Or do you have to basically do all spec homes in order for you to be ineligible for this program. But we are working very hard with the White House, with Congress, with Treasury, and the SBA to ensure that we get some clarity on this issue and also to include as many builders as possible within this program. So I just wanted to inform you about that right off the bat. But we have had a lot of builders that have successfully applied for this program, and so I hope that you'll all be able to take advantage of the Paycheck Protection Program. But basically, it's just a direct incentive for businesses to keep their workers on the payroll. Any loan payments will be deferred for 6 months. There's no collateral or personal guarantees required for this program. There's no fees to apply. The interest rate is 1%. And the loan is due in 2 years, but there's no prepayment penalties or fees. And then as I'll discuss in a moment, there is possibility for loan forgiveness. Who is eligible? Small businesses, which typically means under 500 employees, but there are some exceptions if your receipts and your revenue are under a certain amount. 501c3 nonprofits with fewer than 500 employees, sole proprietors, independent contractors, self-employed individuals, tribal businesses that meet SBA size standards, and 501c19 veterans organizations that meet SBA size standards. Eligible expenses for this program, this has been narrowed down in the last week. We do know that payroll costs are the primary expense that you're going to have with this program. 75% of the expenses must be from your payroll, which I'll outline what payroll includes in a moment. Certain costs related to the continuation of group health care benefits, employee salaries, and that does include commissions, mortgage, rent, and utility payments, and then interest on any debt obligations that were incurred before the covered period. These loans are fully forgivable when used for payroll costs, interest on mortgages, rent, and utilities. At least 75% of that forgiven amount must be used for payroll, just like it is for the entire program. Your loan forgiveness will be reduced in a couple instances. One is if you decrease your full-time employee equivalent headcount based on the number that you used to qualify for the loan. And then also if you reduce the salaries or wages of your employees by more than 25% for any employee that made less than $100,000 in 2019 on an annualized basis. So some of the payroll costs include salary, wages, commissions, or tips, and that is capped at $100,000 per employee on an annualized basis. Employee benefits are also included. State and local taxes assessed on compensation. And then for sole proprietors and independent contractors, there is just a little bit different calculation, but basically it's the net earnings from your self-employment that you can count towards this program. The loan limits can be for up to 1 month of the applicant's average monthly payroll cost times 2.5, and then that is subject to a $10 million cap. The program did open on Friday, April 3rd for small businesses and sole proprietorships, and then on April 10th it opened for independent contractors and self-employed individuals. The program is open until June 30th, but as you've probably heard and read about, this is a very popular program, so the funds are going very quickly and expect to be gone within days. So if you want to take advantage of this program, it's best to go and speak with someone right away to get yourself in line. You can access this program through an existing SBA lender, any federally insured depository institution, federally insured credit unions, and farm credit system institutions that are participating SBA-approved lenders. And if you don't have an SBA lender that you've worked with in the past, you can use the SBA Lender Finder tool at sba.gov/paycheckprotection/find. So that's all I have for my prepared remarks. I'm happy to answer questions in a moment, but for now I'm going to turn it over to Alexis Muck to talk about some unemployment insurance issues.
All right. Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everybody out in Washington. some of this information, for those of you who are able to tune in, we did do a dedicated webinar to the sick and family medical leave using an outside law firm earlier this month. I just want to refer everybody to that. They go into in-depth with scenarios and examples in their presentation. That is available on our website at NAHB on our coronavirus resource page. So if you aren't familiar with this yet, it is a new program that was created in the second stimulus bill, and it establishes emergency sick and family medical leave for employees related to COVID-19. So these apply to all private employers with less than 500 employees, and the cost of the paid leave is fronted by the employer and 100% reimbursable to that employer in the form of payroll tax credits. So businesses can claim a tax credit to fully offset all the wages, including employer health paid insurance costs paid out under this new mandate. And for purposes of calculation, employees are defined as full, part-time, but not contracted other businesses. So for calculating whether you're subject to this, that's sort of the definition that DOL is using. These provisions already went into effect on April 1st and apply to any leave taken between April 1st and December 31st of this year. So how does the sick leave program work? Employers have to provide 10 days paid sick leave if an employee is unable to work or telework as a result of the virus. This is in addition to any paid leave you already offer. So if you have PTO or regular sick leave or anything else, this is supplemental to that. You cannot amend your existing leave and benefits that you offer your employees as a result of the new sick leave. They must stay in place. This is on top of anything that you've already had in place. And you're, as I mentioned, required to cover 100% of the typical wages. So that's calculated as 80 hours or 10 days for full-time employees. For part-time employees, it's calculated as the average number of hours the employee works over a 2-week period. And this is immediate use. It doesn't matter how long you've been employed with the company. You can take it if you've been there for a day or 10 years. Employers are also required to post notices of employees' rights to sick leave. These are available on DOL's website, and NAHB also has those for download. So if certain conditions apply, like your employee is subject to any kind of quarantine or isolation, and this is the CDC definition. This is not, a stay-at-home order. This is actually, if they are being told by a doctor to be quarantining. If the employee has been advised to self-quarantine, if they're experiencing similar symptoms and seeking medical diagnosis, then pay is capped at $511 per day or $5,110 in aggregate per employee. Now, if you are taking the sick leave for another stated purpose, like you're caring for somebody who is sick, or if your child is at home because their daycare or school's been closed as a result of the virus, or you're experiencing something that's substantially similar in terms of presentation of your symptoms, pay is capped at $200 per day and $2,000 in aggregate per employee. And I just want to also note that with that leave, if a business is open and operating, an employee cannot just take the leave because they're afraid to report to work, because they're scared they're going to get sick. They have to, according to OSHA's definition, prove that they are in imminent danger or harm. So they can't just not report because they are afraid to and take that paid leave. And I say that because I've gotten a number of questions on that from NAHB members. How does the family leave program work? This is basically extension of existing Family and Medical Leave Act to employers under 500 employees, where they must offer an additional 10 weeks of paid leave to an employee who is unable to work because they have to care for their minor child under 18. This is for a grand total using the 10 days of sick leave for those stated purposes, plus this 10 weeks of paid leave under Family Medical Leave Act. That's total aggregate of 12 weeks for child care. So employers must pay out no less than 2/3 of the employee's regular rate, or capped at $200 per day, $10,000 in aggregate for this leave. So this leave is only a benefit that if you work for the employer for 30 days or more, unlike the sick leave, which is eligible immediately. The first 10 days of this leave are unpaid, so employees can take that, the paid sick leave that I previously mentioned for those 10 days. They can do it unpaid, or they can take advantage of any other paid leave benefits the employer already offers. Now, there was an exemption crafted into this rule, but it is very narrow. So it's for businesses with 50 or fewer employees. They can only be exempted from providing leave if it's requested because the employee's child school is closed or care provider is unavailable, and that employee serves an essential and irreplaceable function of the business. There's 3 different criteria, like the leave would cause financial harm to the employer, the absence of the employee, they have a specialized role that nobody else could absorb, or they can't find any other workers who are able or willing or qualified to take that employee's role in the company. So again, it's a very narrow exemption, but you don't need to file any paperwork. You just retain records like the employee is taking leave, and you have documentation of that proves that they need to take it. And if you're audited by DOL, they ask to see your records. That's the only time that you'll really need to have that. I would also refer you for specific guidance related to paid leave. DOL has a hotline number that will connect you to your local wage and hour division office, 8664 US Wage. They also have frequent question and answers posted online. They also have a webinar available on this on their website. But I would urge everybody to review there. And just so you are aware, also DOL is not enforcing this compliance until April 17th, unless there's willful violation of these paid leave requirements, but they did build in a window for employers to adjust to this new requirement. On unemployment insurance, I've gotten some questions from members in Washington, so I know this is something that a lot of folks are looking at. It was expanded, so you have traditional unemployment insurance benefits that are already available through your state, but Congress expanded these for an additional 13 weeks. And then they did something very unusual, and it benefits quite a bit of our Federation's membership, but they created a new type of unemployment benefit to the self-insured and independent contractors who are not able to avail themselves of the regular unemployment insurance system. So this is available to the pandemic employment program is for individuals who self-certify they are able to work but cannot because of COVID. It authorizes payments for up to 39 weeks, so through December 31st. To be aware of this, states are experiencing delays in getting these systems up and running for the independent contractors and self-employed because their systems have been tailored to traditional employees in that sense. So they're having to revise a lot of the criteria that they can accept to certify your status as an independent contractor or self-employed. So there's a bit of a learning curve. They're hoping to get it up and running in Washington, according to the agency, by April 18th. Additionally, everybody who is eligible for unemployment assistance, whether it's traditional UI or the PUA program, gets another $600 per week for each eligible individual for up to 4 months, so through July 31st. And I've gotten questions on this too, you know, whether you're essential or not. That has nothing to do with this. So as you're looking at potentially reopening in Washington for business, that doesn't mean you're ineligible if you're an essential business and still allowed to operate. If you are partially employed, I do want to note this expansion of STC programs or short-term compensation. In Washington State, I believe it's known as shared work programs, and that's partial unemployment. So that allows an employer to avoid fully laying off employees by reducing their number of regularly scheduled hours of work so that that employee can continue that relationship with that employer and continue working, but also be able to claim uninsurance benefits that are prorated on top of that reduced pay and reduced hours. So these are as a result of plans that are entered to between an employer and their state agency. The website that is available for this is, I don't have it up here, but I'll type it in the chat, but it's off of your ESD website in Washington. So you can check that out if you're looking at that as an alternative to having to lay off any workers. And with that, that is the end of my section. I'm happy to take any other questions in the chat box or otherwise.
All right, Alexis, thanks very much. Appreciate that. Again, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box. I saw a couple that were put in there earlier, which I'll ask Alex to address here in just a second. Before I do that, though, to give you time to type your questions, one thing I wanted to mention, Kat referred earlier on to efforts to get Washington State back open again and working with the governor. One of the things that NAHB is doing tomorrow actually is what we're calling the stand down for safety. And that's where we're encouraging members across the country to shut their job sites down temporarily and do a thorough safety briefing with their employees to reiterate to them the importance of social distancing on the job site and all of the things that are important to keep them safe. We really are doing that both to encourage our employees, our employers to make it clear to the employees, and also to reiterate how importantly we take being an essential business in those states where we're open. Now I realize since you guys can't stand down because they've shut you down, but we also hope the fact that we're doing that will give you the visibility to put that in front of the governor to let him know how seriously we're taking that. Jerry Howard was actually on the Stuart Varney show earlier today and was asked about it, so we're getting a lot of good visibility from that, and hopefully that will help in your efforts there. We will also, Kat, just to let you know, I know you're going to have those plans for probably each company. We'll have Rob Matuga, who's our safety specialist, reach out to you, make sure that you have access to all the resources we have on the website, and he can work through some of those things and help you with that as well to get you those resources. So as we turn to the questions, just I'd reiterate, because I know some folks are on phone only and probably can't see the chat box, we will make the slides available to Kat and the MBA folks to get on their website, as well as a recording of the presentation so we can get those available to you and anyone else in the membership who might need them. So as I go back now, Alex, you saw the first question. I know you started to answer it in the chat, but Michael asked if you get the EIDL loan, can you get the EIDL loan if you've also received the PPP loan? So I'll let you start with that and get the details on that, and then we'll just sort of run through the rest of the questions that are on the chat box.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Brett. Yeah, Michael, as I said in the chat box, the short answer is yes, you can apply for and receive both loans, but it is a much more complicated answer that you need to be aware of. The short of it is you can apply for an EIDL loan and roll it into the PPP loan, but you need to be very careful to make certain that those funds aren't going to the same things. That is to say, they are going to be watching very closely for double dipping on these. So my suggestion, what we've been telling folks, is that if you are going to apply for both programs, you need to consult with your tax counsel, your legal counsel, and you need to make it painfully aware to your SBA approved lender that you are applying for and/or have already received EIDL funds. They need to know this if you go to apply for both. But the short answer is yes, you can.
All right, Alex, thanks very much. Brian mentioned that his loan was funded today, and he's very happy about that. And I saw on there earlier that the lender, because Kat asked, the lender he went through was Washington Trust, and that he had seen they had processed something like 3,000 applications through Washington Trust. Let's see, going down the page here. Yes, we'll make the resources available.
Hey, Brett, this is Alex again. If I may just jump in on that, on the number of loans, it is a point worth noting. As Heather said, there are reports. It's been widely reported nationwide that the PPP program could run out of money as early as today. In fact, we are pushing very hard, along with a number of other business groups here in Washington, to re-up those funds. There's been a lot of talk on the Hill about doing another $250 billion. We believe there will be additional, it is a virtual certainty there will be more funds put into these, so we are encouraging people to still go and have those conversations with your SBA approved lender if you haven't already.
All right, thanks, Alex. Heather, I see that Brian has asked if there's any word as to when SBA is expected to issue regulations related to PPP loan forgiveness. It says the CARES Act said they're going to be published within 30 days of enactment of the law. Do you have any information on that, Heather?
Yes, there is quite a bit of information available on Treasury's website. They have all of the interim rules and subsequent appendixes to those interim rules. And then also there's a frequently asked questions page, so it just depends on what you're looking for loan forgiveness. We don't have all the answers yet as to what paperwork's needed, but we do have general guidelines as to what they're looking for.
All right, thank you. Alexis, Kari asked, do you know if their insurance rates will increase because of employees filing for unemployment insurance at this time?
I'm not sure. I know that the rates for state unemployment tax were locked in. Oh, David Logan jumped on that. They were locked in December for the year. I don't think they can change them, but I defer to David.
Okay, yeah, and David jumped in and said that they will not, so hopefully that answers the question. Any other questions? We'll wait here for just a moment. I don't see anybody else typing.
I did see a question on here. If a borrower is denied a PPP loan because the lender does not understand the speculator exception, what do you suggest that borrower do? If you have already applied and have been denied the loan, you are not allowed to then reapply. If your lender just tells you, I don't think you're going to be eligible for this loan, we're not going to process your application, you can then go look for another lender. I would recommend going to SBA's website, sba.gov/paycheck-protection/find to find the eligible lenders in your community. They are adding hundreds and even thousands of lenders to this program daily because, as Alex said, they are going to try to ramp it up even more in the coming weeks. So if you have not been officially denied after applying, you can still shop for a new lender.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate that. There are no other questions that I see. I've tried to scroll through here, and I think there are a lot of comments, but I think most of those have been addressed at one place or another. And I also don't see anybody else typing at this point. So if there are no other questions, once again, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the staff that you heard from today. If you've got questions, if you think of something after the fact, don't hesitate to reach out to them via email, via telephone. We're not in the office, but we're absolutely working, and we're accessible to you anytime to try to address any issues that you have and any questions. And we appreciate the opportunity that the CAT put forward today to present this information to you. I think this is exactly how the Federation is supposed to work between the local, the state, and the National Association. So with that, thank you all again for tuning in today, and I would turn it back over to Kat if she has any final words.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you, Team NAHB, and all of the resources that you are providing to us as a local and our members, as your members. We'll look forward to getting these slides, and we will put them up on the resources page of our COVID-19 landing page. The other NAHB and BIAW resources are already up and running. We really appreciate your time and effort in helping us to set this up and organize it on such a short timeline today. Thank you for all the great information.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon.
You as well.